Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar presented by the Validation Institute. Before I introduce Al Lewis, I would like to just briefly tell you about the Validation Institute, and then at the end of the webinar, we're going to be sending you some fantastic, great tools to help be quivers in your arsenal to be able to address particular challenges that come up in your day-to-day job. The Validation Institute is a mission-driven organization designed to validate performance claims of vendors and solution providers in the healthcare area. So help you make better decisions by seeing that their marketing claims and performance claims have been validated by a third party. We also educate the employers trying to make decisions on which healthcare benefits to bring into an organization. We identified about a year ago that there really was no good unbiased channel for education for purchasing of healthcare benefits, so we created the Certified Health Value Professional designation, which is now recognized and counts towards SHRM recertification and is a fantastic way to learn about all the ways that employers are dramatically improving healthcare benefits while dramatically reducing costs. And then finally, we connect. In events like today's webinar, we connect you with the experts that can help you make better decisions. So we validate, educate, and connect. So the next slide. I'd like to thank everyone that has come on today. We've had a tremendous outcome for this webinar. There's over 700 attendees on the call today. And just to answer a question right up front, everybody will receive a recording of the event along with the slides when they click on the recording. And you'll also you'll get an email from us to get access to something called the Certified Outcome Report Analysis, which is a 30-minute online course that's designed to teach you the techniques that our own data scientists use in critically analyzing and deciding on performance claims that are made by vendors. Al Lewis will be talking about some of these techniques today. And then after the call, absolutely no cost or obligation, you will receive this online course, which if you go through, then you can use the CORA after your name. And better yet, you'll be able to have a new tool in making decisions for your organization. And again, this is SHRM approved, so this counts towards SHRM recertification credit for all the HR people on the call. Next slide. So I'm going to get right into it. Today's webinar is how to avoid getting sued like Yale. We hope to leave you with some great actionable ways to protect yourself against these types of situations. Next slide. Al Lewis is our presenter today, and Al is widely considered the country's leading expert on wellness outcomes measurement through his authorship of seminal textbooks, Why Nobody Believes in Numbers, and with Tom Emmerich, Cracking Healthcare Costs, and the downloadable Outcomes, Economics, and Ethics of the Workplace Wellness Industry. So we brought you the national expert here today to present the webinar. Take it away, Al.
Okay, thank you very much. And the first thing is just to mention that this webinar does not constitute legal advice, and the best legal advice we can give you is to have your in-house counsel review this presentation and then give you legal advice, which will constitute legal advice. So we're going to talk about avoiding Yale's fate. We're going to start with a little bit of background, then go into what they did, they didn't do, they should have done, how to avoid all their mistakes as well as a lawsuit, and what you should do. Oh, and if you have questions, put them in the chat box. This time's out so that there should be a couple minutes left, but we are going to answer all the questions on email to all attendees. So let's start by climbing into the Wayback Machine and reviewing the voluntary incentive penalties that Yale likely breached. I'm not going to say they definitely breached them because I'm not the judge. There was a December 2017 court decision that ruled that clinically based wellness programs must be voluntary, as the dictionary defines it, starting this last January. That vacated the previous EEOC safe harbor, which allowed 30% incentives or penalties for voluntary programs. So a program was considered voluntary if, in fact, you could lose thousands of dollars if you didn't do it. And the incentive counted as well, the theory being that you would just have a high deductible plan and then add back the incentive. So in the immortal words of the great philosophers, the undisputed truth from 1972, a smile is just a frown turned upside down. Now, the EEOC had originally promised rules by August 2018, but now it will likely be 2020. In between, there is no safe harbor. In fact, the EEOC has delayed their rulemaking twice now, and this is no knock on them. They've had, first of all, it's a multi-step process that takes months or years, sometimes years, and their key positions were vacant for quite some time. They're now filled. Now, when they do propose rules this December, they have to go through what's called a notice of proposed rulemaking, and they go through a comments and revisions period in which all the lobbyists throw comments into a website, and so do a few bystanders. But it's and they have to weigh those, and then they put the rules in force. So it could be a year from now or even longer that the safe harbor does not exist. So what are the rules now? Well, there are no rules, which means that these will be decided on a case-by-case basis. The safe harbors that where employees can't sue, or I mean, they can sue whatever they like, but they can't get anywhere with a suit, are limited to non-medical alternatives to screening, which are not covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which only apply to clinical medical things that employers do. Or they could dispense with penalties, incentives altogether. They can still do the screenings and the health risk assessments, but just with no substantial incentive involved. Modest incentives will be okay. I know what question I'm going to get, by the way, which is what's the dividing line between incentives and penalties that are okay and that are not okay? And the short answer is it's not for me to say. It's up to the courts. What I do know is that the original judge, Judge Bates, made very clear that large four-figure type incentives or penalties are not okay. And beyond that, he said, I don't make the rules, it's up to the EEOC. So if you're still doing this stuff, you could get sued like Yale did if an employee claims large penalties or incentives violate their ADA or GINA rights. Now, it's not that easy. They have to go through an administrative hearing first, but apparently it's not that hard either because the employees at Yale did and were able to get into court. Now, there are other exposures as well besides the one in italics here, which is the one being sued on. Another ADA exposure is in outcomes-based programs. Age and gender discrimination is a cause of action because the outcomes goals don't vary by age, but the penalties are much more likely to be assessed on older, especially female employees who have a harder time losing weight. So that's an exposure that Yale does not have because it's not outcomes-based, but any outcomes-based program will absolutely have this exposure as well. And trust me, if I can find it, and I'm not an attorney, I don't even play one on TV, real attorneys are going to be able to find it as well. Actually, technically, I am an attorney. I hold a JD from Harvard, but I don't practice. There's also an ACA exposure, Affordable Care Act exposure. The rule for the Affordable Care Act and the Affordable Care Act and the ADA don't really correspond that well, so you can violate one and not the other, or both, or neither. The Affordable Care Act rule is that these wellness programs have to be quote unquote reasonably designed to reduce risk or prevent disease, but most of them are not, since they violate clinical guidelines. And by the way, I'm not going to go through the things that are in hyperlink. You can do that when you get a copy of this. Some even make employees fatter and less healthy. Others make people with weight issues, with eating disorders, go into relapse. I mean, there's all sorts of issues in ACA. There may possibly be an ERISA issue as well. Now, I don't really know anything about ERISA beyond what you're about to see here. The ERISA means you're supposed to hold these health benefit assets in trust for the benefit of the employees. But if you know that these programs lose money and harm employees, which outcomes-based programs have been shown to do, you could be violating ERISA. That one I don't know. The previous ones I'm quite certain about. What is your liability risk? Well, it's still perfectly legal to do this stuff, but there are 4 reasons why you might consider this an unacceptable risk. One is plaintiff attorneys read trade publications to learn about new lawsuits. This is what they do for a living. Second is win, lose, or draw, the PR and morale impact from wellness disputes is always negative. Those of you with long memories will remember Penn State, which got in the national news many times for their uh, very poorly conceived and poorly executed program. Or right now, Yale. Yale's not exactly getting good press today, and they haven't gotten good press for this program at all. And this is not something that just bothers just a few employees. There was a Willis Towers Watson survey, and kudos to Willis Towers Watson for their integrity. They're a great consulting firm that revealed a strong employee disdain for clinical wellness programs with a record low net promoter score of minus 52 for North American programs. You can see it right there. Now, for those of you who don't know NPS, it goes from minus 100 to 100. The lowest major industry gets a +2, which is not surprisingly cable TV and internet services. So that means that employees would vastly rather sit at home waiting for the cable guy to show up than they would be screened by their workplace. And then the number 4 is the West Virginia teachers struck partly over wellness. It was, you might remember earlier in the year they went on strike. It was partly over wages, but they did not go back to work until the wellness program was struck down. And this is actually hyperlinked because it happens that just yesterday there was an article about the West Virginia teacher strike and wellness called The Scourge of Workplace Wellness Programs. Now remember, this is not my opinion. That was the title of the article, The Scourge of Workplace Wellness Programs. So here's what Yale did. What happened? There were somewhat more than 5,000 unionized technical and clerical employees who got to quote unquote choose between being screened and then were possibly or probably had to be coached, forced to be coached, or losing $25 a week, which is a 4-figure annual penalty. The AARP, along with some named employees, filed a complaint saying, quote unquote, the weekly penalty, ... has a coercive effect on its employees, forcing them to either pay a fine or participate in a wellness program against their will. That is a violation. So that is the essence of the claim. The union also claims that personal health information is being shared, and they have some data on that. But once again, we're agnostic on this. I would just recommend that you read the complaint itself, which actually lists many abuses. But first, the good news about the Yale program, which is they actually conform to US Preventive Services Task Force guidelines, which only about 5 to 10% of wellness programs do. Now, you might say, why wouldn't a wellness program conform to actual clinical guidelines? Aren't they supposed to be benefiting employees? Well, when you conform to guidelines, you don't make as much money by milking employers as you do if you don't conform to guidelines and you screen people for everything every year. Now, I'm not going to go through all the items on this list, but you can see that this came right off the complaint, cut and pasted, that you can see that the age appropriateness for each of these were well laid out, and there actually are no tests that were done that the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force says shouldn't be done. They actually get points for that because many wellness vendors, and I'm talking to you, Interactive Health, will screen people for a zillion things that they are not supposed to be screened for. There are just a couple of things here, and they're really just minor things. For instance, cholesterol screening says start at age 40. Really, males are recommended to start at 35 and females 45. Honestly, this is really as good as it gets. I mean, I'm not expecting chapter and verse on U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, but Yale managed to take this lemonade, and if all they did was this program and they said, we'll give you $100 if you do it, I'd be up here telling you what a great program this is. Instead, I'm telling you that they took this lemonade and they managed to make it into a lemon with their forced coaching and their forced penalties. And there is an allegation, and I'm going to be very clear in this webinar that I'm sticking to facts. I'm not talking about my opinions except where noted. that personal health information was shared. And I'm not going to get into it. This is on the slide if you want to go back to it. But just be aware that vendors, only carriers and not vendors are subject to HIPAA. So just be aware of that if you're using a non-carrier wellness vendor. Here's how they turn the lemonade into a lemon. You were forced to be coached if your scores weren't very good 3 times a year. The coach was asking you very personal questions. And according to one union member, if you didn't answer them right, they would harass you. And much of the information or suggestions were likely controversial or even wrong. I say likely because I did not see their health risk assessment, and I don't know exactly what they're saying, but I do know that most of these things are, like if you take the example of milk, they're still wrong, okay? Because in milk, whole is the new skim. All the recent data says we should be doing full fat dairy, but I pretty much guarantee you, if you look at your own health risk assessment, it says the opposite. It says avoid, you skim, low fat milk is what you want to do, yada, yada, yada. Wrong. In fact, here's a health risk assessment I just saw a few months ago. And I won't tell you who does it. You can ask me later, but this is a very common one. And if you look under dairy products, it says, how can you make healthier choices? Dairy products and make healthier choices. You see it, low fat or non-fat milk, and also low fat or non-fat yogurt. So here's a trivia question for you. What do producers put in low fat or non-fat yogurt to make it taste good? If you're thinking sugar, you're right. So you are paying your wellness vendor to tell your employees to eat sugar. Now here's the winner for abusing Yale employees. It said female participants over 50 must undergo a mammogram, which is actually a USPSTF recommendation every 2 years. But there was Christine, who had had breast cancer, was a survivor, underwent a double mastectomy when battling cancer and therefore could not comply. So of course the coach was very sympathetic, apologized for calling her, and waived the requirement of having to get a mammogram because she didn't have any breast. She did exactly the opposite. A vendor representative, this is right off the complaint, contacted Christine several times and told her she would be held in non-compliance and charged the fine if she did not get a mammogram. Now, there is no law that says a vendor can't do that. And what vendors say to your employees if they're forced into screening, that this is an extreme example, but you have no control over it. So here's what Yale didn't do, and I'll sum it up in one word: arithmetic. This is the size of the fine for the course of the year. This is where they spend their money. And this is not Yale's list. This is the list for the US employer population as a whole in descending order of hospital spending on different DRGs, on different diagnoses. You can see at the top is joint replacement, followed by vaginal delivery, then spinal fusion. And if you actually parse this thing to look at where the top 25 are, 11 of the top 25 are either musculoskeletal or birth events. But here's a newsflash: for all the fining and forced coaching that Yale did, none of it applied to the actual high things that are high costs that people spend in the hospital. You're not going to find diabetes on this list. You're not, because it's an over 65 thing generally. You're not going to find asthma, COPD, CHF, or even heart attacks. You find bypasses down here. Well, something, you can't really coach an employee out of a bypass. There's nothing that can be done there. These other things are fairly random. Infectious diseases, can't do anything there, bowel procedures, et cetera. I mean, the nature of the under 65 population, as I said in my book, Cracking Health Costs, and it's bad form to quote your own book, so I only do it rarely, but it says everything in life has an 80-20 rule. In healthcare, the 80-20 rule is that 80% of the time, there is no 80-20 rule. And this is, you can look at this and really take out the birth events and the MSK, and hospital admissions are all over the place in the under 65 population. Now, we're not going to go into this math here because it's not really part of the presentation, but we're going to give you a tool to calculate your own wellness sensitive medical event rate. meaning the number of diabetes admissions and heart attack admissions and ER visits that you have. And what you're going to find is between $100 and $200 an employee a year, which is to say a fraction of what the fine is. Here's what Yale also didn't do, which is actually read the literature on savings from wellness. The best case scenario is the trade association. Now, there's not a trade association in the country that underestimates the value of whatever product it's representing. So this is the best case scenario that the Wellness Trade Association could come up with in their own measurement and outvaluation guide that they, by their own words, spent 2 years preparing. And that is that wellness saves 99 cents a month before fees. 99 cents a month before fees. So there's the gross savings potential. You're starting to see a trend here, okay? Now, let's add in the fees. Well, if you add in the fees, the extra doctor visits, the false positives, the extra lab tests, all the stuff that I might add that the Health Enhancement Research Organization says are costs, you can see that it bears absolutely no relationship whatsoever to the size of the fine. So, conclusion. Yale would actually make much more money off their employees in fines if none of their employees complied versus if they all did. Now, is this an accident or is this on purpose? I don't know, but I can tell you it's a fairly common strategy. You make a program so onerous that employees prefer to lose money so that you can save it. And there was one vendor that used to actually advertise this, which is Bravo. And when I pointed it out to them, they immediately took it off their website. But of course, I caught a screenshot. In fact, I always say the beginning of the end for the wellness industry was when I learned how to do screenshots. So here's what Yale should have done. Not let themselves get snookered by vendors and consultants. Forced pry, poke, and prod programs, meaning old conventional wellness programs where you pry into people's lives with health risk assessments, you poke them with needles and you prod them to go to the doctor when they're not sick, lose money, period. That's why no one has claimed the $3 million reward for showing they save money. In fact, the reward, you don't even have to show they save money, you just have to show that they don't lose money. This reward has been available for several years. There are many vendors on this call right now. They are all fully aware of this reward. None of them have claimed it, attempted to claim it. And it's not like their finger is on the scale in the rules either. The finger, actually my finger is underneath the scale pushing it up because I made the rules very easy. There's a panel of 5 judges. I only get to appoint 1 of the 5 judges. Now, the last 11 studies in a row have shown 0 results in moving the needle on health and hence 0 savings. Yale should have read these things. They're all available to be read. Now here's a summary, and once again, these are all hyperlinked, so you can click through on your own. In fact, the title is hyperlinked, so you can see the summary. There were two randomized control trials that showed no improvement in behaviors, risks, or costs. And in fact, the wellness industry's trade magazine, the American Journal of Health Promotion, did say that randomized control trials show negative ROIs. And they said that before these 2 studies, and they were absolutely right. When you do a study well, it shows nothing happened. And then if you look back at the C. Everett Koop Awards, which used to be given out for the best wellness vendor, and they're not given out anymore because the so-called best vendors kept getting terrible press for their once they were exposed as award winners. So the award winner in 2016, and we'll show them a little bit more later, showed harms, actual harms to the employees. The 2015 award winner, which was McKesson, caused employees to gain weight and didn't reduce risk. The 2014 employer, and we'll talk about the lack of risk reduction, but they had actually told 514 state employees they had cancer, and that turned out they did not have cancer, and they actually claimed to have saved their lives, even though they didn't have cancer in the first place. So you can see why they don't give out these awards anymore. In the 2012 one, we'll also look at it. The 2013 one, I have a conflict of interest, so I can't put that one in. The difference in outcomes were between the participants and non-participants were admitted to be completely due to the study design, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. Then there was an excellent researcher who used to be associated with the wellness industry, not so much anymore, because her article showed that none of these articles, previous articles showing savings, were of sufficient quality to be considered evidentiary. Connecticut, which I might add is the state that Yale is located in, so this was easy for them to find, they put something out in Health Affairs that said that their costs increased and their risk didn't go down. Vitality Group admitted they did wellness on their own employees. Now, if you think of one place where wellness should work, it should be if a wellness vendor does wellness on its own employees. I mean, at least they can make something up, you know? But they, to their credit, admitted that the weight increased and the eating habits got worse. And then, as I mentioned, the Age of the Health Hero study. And then PepsiCo did a study that showed cost reduction from wellness and disease management, but all the cost reduction was attributable to disease management, and wellness lost $3. Wellness only saved 33 cents for every dollar spent, so it lost 67 cents on every dollar, and that was the best result. So Yale, unless they did this deliberately, must have gotten snookered one of 4 ways into thinking they saved money. Now remember, I have no inside information into how Yale got snookered, but I can tell you how, in general, people get snookered 4 different ways. Let's start with measuring on participants versus and ignoring dropouts, and ignoring non-participants, or else using non-participants as the control group. Okay, so one thing you have to know, and this is a take it to the bank. You know, people sometimes ask me on these webinars, are these your opinions or are these facts? Well, I've got $3 million on the line that says these are facts. You can take this one to the bank. Participants will always outperform non-participants, period. It does not matter what the program is. There was even a program where they told diabetics to eat more carbs and less fat, naturally done by somebody on the Cooper Ward Committee, and they showed massive savings from telling diabetics to do exactly the wrong thing. In this case, the participants are the blue line going up slowly, as you can see, matched to the non-participants in 2004. The non-participants are the red line, which is going up quickly. And there is a big and increasing gap between these two. So you might say, well, how do you know this wasn't due to the program? How do you know it was just due to the design, the study design? Well, the answer is that they didn't actually start the program for 2 years after they split the groups. So by the time they started the program, the participants were already way ahead of the non-participants, vastly outperforming them. Participants will outperform non-participants even if there is not a program to participate in. So the award-winning program showed 20% savings before it even existed. Next is counting only people with high risk at the beginning of the period. So this is a vendor that guarantees that 30% of its high and medium risk people will decline in risk. Okay, so they're going to take the high people and have it go down. So let's see what happens if you do this. And let's use the example of smoking cessation. Let's assume that smoking is the only risk factor, and everyone in your organization smokes, but like many smokers, they also quit, so that they smoke half the time and they quit half the time. It's the only risk factor, so smokers are high risk and non-smoker or ex-smokers are low risk, meaning 50% of the workforce is smoking every year, but it's a different 50%. This methodology, which only counts the smokers quitting, would find a 100% reduction in smokers every year, even though the smoking rate remains unchanged. And this is a classic example of obfuscating the natural flow at risk. I'm going to show you a vendor which showed the natural flow, but first, let me just also show you how you know this is not an accident. 2/3 of people are low risk, and this is very common. But notice that this vendor smushed the 2/3 into the lower third of the graph. And in fact, they have these little bubbles here that each represent 10 people or something, so that your eyes were not drawn to them. It was actually fairly brilliant, I have to say. So let's show a vendor that shows you how the natural flow of risk works. So this vendor is Interactive Health. They stopped showing this chart, which is how you know it's right. And I'm going to work my way through it here. It's going to show the first risk for various people, high, elevated, low, and moderate and low, as compared to the last risk. And we're going to work through it slowly. Yellow means the risk stayed the same. Red means up, and green means down. So as I mentioned, this is first to last. And let's see what direction people go in. Now, if you're high risk to begin with, you can only go down. And now we're actually getting a few questions, which is good. Actually, we're getting quite a number of questions, but they're kind of hard to read for me because I'm only seeing one line. There's something about quality of employee life. You can ask the employees in this program. Remember, this is not. So let me actually. This is a good question. I've been skipping a whole bunch of them. The question is, what about the quality of the employee life? Let me make a very clear distinction that I should have made right at the beginning. So thank you for the question. We are talking in this webinar about Yale doing wellness to employees, not Yale doing wellness for employees. Wellness programs done for employees will not dramatically, but will increase the quality of the employee life. Wellness programs done to employees will reduce the quality of the employee experience. How can you tell which is which? Well, that's easy. If you have to find people or give them huge incentives to participate in something they don't want to participate in, or force them to pretend that they've stopped smoking or lose weight, that's doing wellness to employees. That's the one that's the EEOC violation. That's the one we're talking about. If you want to do wellness for employees, more power to you. We think that's great. So notice on this first risk that 5.1% of the 10%, which is to say about half, stay the same and the other half go down. They can't go up. They're already high risk. Of the ones who were low risk, most of them stayed the same, but 9 percentage points, actually I think 8.9%, about 9% went up. So 5% went down, 9% went up from the highest and lowest. So what they will tell you is that 85% of people maintained or reduced their risk because they either stayed the same or got better. But using this very same chart, which of course omits all dropouts and all non-participants, you could easily make the argument that 79.7% got worse or failed to improve despite all the quote unquote coaching and everything else that was done. So here's how a vendor can use this information to set parameters. And I'm not going to tell you that Optum, that I'm not going to make any opinions about this. I'm just going to show you Optum's metrics, and you can compare them to what you just saw. Now, I've seen this several times from Optum, and I have mentioned it to them, but obviously I don't have much power there. So it says a performance guarantee about risk change can be based on either of three options, which of course is not grammatical. At least X% of those who are medium or high risk move to a lower risk status. Well, we've seen how that works. Alternatively, the performance guarantee can be based on how high the difference is between people who improve risk and people who do not. The percent of HRA completers who increase risk should be lower than the percent who decrease risk. Now let's look at this again. Okay, so if you use the Optum technique, you'll find that 49% of high-risk people declined, while only 15% of low-risk people got worse. So Optum would succeed using percent, okay? Using percent, 49% declined, but only 15% got worse. But the actual number of people, which is not offered by Optum as a metric, who got worse is vastly greater, 8.9% of the population, than the number of people who got better, which is 4.9% of the population. So this is a kind of a brilliant way of sort of, two words. And by the way, the boldface is mine. Trust me when I tell you they did not put the words percent in boldface. And the third one is similar to 1 and 2, but only for participants, not non-participants. So we know how that turns out. So another way that people can do this is by comparing to trend. So people will tell you that, well, yeah, your costs went up, but thanks to wellness, they did not go up as fast as trend. And this comes right off of WellStep's website. And this is a comparison of what WellSteps would call the results of a high impact program to what would happen if you did nothing. And you can go to WellStep's website, you can fiddle with this is their ROI calculator. And the curious part about this is that when they ask you, what's the before, what's the after for obesity and smoking, and I put in that you can't have it go up anymore because they don't let you do that, but I put in there was no change in obesity and no change in smoking, but they still show this massive savings versus trend, which is a classic vendor ruse. And this time I will use the word ruse. Now, the other thing I would point out is that, well, this is kind of hypothetical. Gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could come up with a real example? And wouldn't you know, as I was putting this together for the first time a couple months ago, a real example just popped up, which is the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. They have something called the Live Well program, which has led to healthcare savings of nearly $6 million for the last 4 years, as healthcare spending has increased at 40% below the national average. So in other words, healthcare spending has continued to go up, but they drew a line that meant that it didn't go up as fast as the national average. Now, there are two problems with concluding that this program saved money. One very minor problem is it didn't. How do I know it didn't? Well, the average employee lost 7 ounces. Okay, how are you going to save $314 if you lose 7 ounces? And the second thing is, what they did was they made all their employees get checkups every year. And that costs a ton of money, and annual checkups are not good for employees' health. Even Yale didn't require annual checkups. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force doesn't recommend annual checkups, and the reason they don't require them is because they're worthless and possibly harmful. Now, I know what you're going to say. What? What? And in fact, this is probably the least popular slide that we have, which is why I say, don't shoot me. I'm just the messenger here, okay? Here is the literature. The three arguably most widely cited, most respected publications, Choosing Wisely, the New England Journal of Medicine, and JAMA all say the same thing. Yeah, it's important to have a regular doctor. I never get checkups. I have a regular doctor. But healthy people often don't need annual checkups. They can even do more harm than good. And they keep going on that. Annual checkups usually don't make you healthier. The New England Journal of Medicine, an editorial came out against the annual physical. The Journal of the American Medical Association, compared with usual care's offers of health checks, meaning checkups, were not associated with lower rates of all-cause mortality, mortality from cardiovascular disease, or mortality from cancer. Health checks may be associated with more diagnoses and more drug treatment. You know, I've always said that's a problem in the United States. We don't have enough diagnoses and we don't take enough drugs. Not. Morbidity was infrequently reported, ... So here is a better idea for checkups, two better ideas. You can write these down. Both of them, by the way, are in Quizzify for those of you who use Quizzify. And you're not in Quizzify, you're not required to use a question if you don't want to, but one of the questions is how often should you get checkups? And two of the answers are you should get them in an age appropriate way. 2 in your 20s, 3 in your 30s, 4 in your 40s, 5 in your 50s, and then annually, because that will match match the frequency of the checkups with the likelihood that something might go wrong, hence minimizing the number of false positives. And forget about the cost. Obviously, the cost is much lower. But here's another thing you could do, is that on the form that an employee fills out, a doctor has to fill out for the wellness program, they say to the employee, unless you feel a need to come sooner, you can schedule your next checkup for whatever year based on their health status. So my question to the group is, why would you do this annually if in fact an employee's doctor thinks annual is inappropriate? I would bet that they know what they're doing. Now, the only problem with number two is that it creates a little bit of a HIPAA issue. In order for an employee to get credit for an annual checkup when they don't need an annual checkup, they have to show you that in fact they don't need an annual checkup. In the overall scheme of HIPAA issues on a scale of 1 to 10, where Yale might be a 10, that would be a 1 or a 2, but I just did want to bring it up. And finally, this is another, these are all I was going to say this is a classic, but they're all classics. They don't attribute savings to reduction in risk. So remember, the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport was saying it saved $4 million out of 7 ounces of lost weight. They are not alone. This was a Cooper Award winning program where there were 20,000 employees, 15,000 employees in Nebraska said they didn't want to participate. 5,000, actually 6,000 participated the first year, 800 dropped out. So 5,199 were left. And of that, 186 reduced a risk factor. Somehow they got $4.2 million of savings out of this. And this, of course, doesn't include all the people in this program who were told they had cancer and had to go find out that they didn't have cancer. They didn't count any of that expense. So trivial risk reduction, massive savings again. Once again, another Cooper Award winning program, Pfizer, 9 million in savings. This time they compared people who opened an email to people who did not open an email. People who opened the email lost 3 ounces. People who did not open it gained 2 ounces. This is a screenshot. This is not me. This is what they said. And the most recent Cooper Award, since they've stopped giving them out, actually went to a vendor where the health measures got worse, and they still managed to save massive amounts of money. And this is a terrific snooker. So let me show you what you would learn in the Certified Outcomes Report Analysis, which, by the way, covers all of this stuff. But specifically, what it teaches you is if you see something squirrely from a vendor, you got to look really hard at it. So this vendor's Cooper Award application said, look at how much we got these changes to decline, how many people got to decline for all of these things, BMI, blood pressure, glucose, cholesterol, et cetera. But folks, let me tell you, it's a jungle out there. You cannot believe what vendors tell you. You must check it. You either have to insist that the vendor be validated, or you take the Certified Outcomes Report Analysis course and learn yourself. So this is what I did. As soon as I saw this, I realized that there was a snooker going on here. So I took their exact figures and I separated out the improvements from the deteriorations. I added the improvements and the deteriorations, and lo and behold, vastly more people got worse than better. And in fact, if you take out people with normal glucose, whose glucose went down, which by the way is the last thing you want to have happen if you got teachers, this is a school district, the Boise School District, you really don't want them snoozing in the middle of the day because they got low glucose. If you take out this, which does not lead to any savings at all, it's basically a 2-to-1 increase of risk factors versus decrease of risk factors. And yet, massive amounts of money were saved, both by putting in that little trend line that we talked about and kind of wiggling a little bit so it didn't look too suspicious, and showing the actual. Now, how do I know that this money wasn't saved? Well, that's easy, because on another figure in this thing, which WellStep subsequently removed after I got a screenshot, they showed that they were trying to show that the participants outperformed the non-participants, but what they accidentally showed was, in fact, average costs went up for the combination. So here they have them going down for the entire organization, the entire Boise School District. Here they have them going up on an individual basis. Turns out that the school district just insured fewer people, and that's why the costs went down, even though the individual costs went up. Now you see why there's a validation institute. Yes, so I don't know which one of these Yale fell for, but they either decided to make money by finding employees or they fell for something. Now here's how to avoid their mistakes. in fact, you can avoid this in any wellness program. First, you as we talked about, you could simply take the critical outcomes, certified outcomes report training, or to avoid liability, you can pass the liability to the vendor. Now, in the case of Quizzify, this is what our indemnification language looks like. We don't indemnify just for Quizzify, we indemnify for the entire program. And other vendors will do that as well. So you can take this language, take out the words Quizzify, put in your other vendor, and they should be willing to do exactly what we do, which is cover 80% of any award up to 10 times the value of the contract. All you need to do to indemnify, all you need to do to be safe in ADA is to give people a choice of screening or something clinical versus a non-clinical option. And once again, you'll get a copy of this, but this says choose between traditional screening or play the online health education game. The choice is yours. Select the screening if, and then it says, well, you know, if you have some health issues, you might want to do the screening. Otherwise, play the game. I'm not going to go into details there. This is unfortunately not a Quizzify sales presentation, so I'll leave that to you to see. So that's how you avoid the lawsuits. And here's how you measure the outcomes. There are two ways of doing it, validly and invalidly. I'm sorry. Yes, there are, but there are two ways of doing it validly, objectively and as perceived by employees. Objectively, and we'll send you this information along with a little study guide, you collect all the ICD-10s for your wellness sensitive medical events across your entire employer population, and you add them up, ER events plus inpatient events, and then the tool will calculate the total. This is all ER and inpatient, by the way, not going to the doctor. Calculate the total, and then you graph them up. You take your population, you graph them up, and this shows chronic disease events per 1,000 members for an organization that actually had both a COPD and a diabetes program. The COPD program showed some improvement. The diabetes program, well, there's a lot of, in these diabetes programs, a lot of people, their blood sugar goes way down. They end up in the ER for hypoglycemia. But you can measure this completely validly, objectively. You can also measure it very simply using and we'll send this to you for free, using what the Validation Institute calls the Benefits Engagement Strategy Survey Tool, or the BEST tool. It's a cost effectiveness tool. So first thing you do is you estimate your cost. You take the per member per year, per employee per year cost per 1,000, or total cost. And in this case, we're just going to show you an example of it was a small group, so we did total cost. We measured 5 things. We're going to show you this graph where you put the cost, which you all know your own costs, on this axis, and then you put the engagement rate, which is, did you use the survey? Did you use the tool with the benefit? And how useful was it? And that gives you total engagement on this axis. So you ask your employees 3 things only. It's all you got to do. How many times, if at all, did you use this benefit? That measures participation. Was it useful? Measures perceived value. And do you feel this benefit enhances, reflects a positive corporate culture, which is what my namesake, who works also as an advisor at Validation Institute, I wish I were related to him because he's a brilliant guy, calls nice programs. But programs that only a few people use, like fertility benefits. So you're going to get a low score here, but you're going to get a high score here because people like working at a place that offers this kind of thing. So you multiply the uses times the usefulness, and that gives you total workforce engagement. That's going to be your y-axis. And then the third question here, this is going to be the size of the bubble, which represents the impact on culture as perceived by the employees, independent of the number of times that they used it. So this is what, and like I say, we'll send you the survey. This is what the old version looked like. We have a new version that's very clean now. You can see, did you use this program? No, yes, how many times? How useful was it? Very, somewhat, not at all. And so we ourselves at Quizzify have used this at this point, I think 6 or 7 times. What you do is you then measure the cost of the program against the usefulness. Programs up here are cost effective. Programs down here are not cost effective. It's that simple. And this is the way it turns out. This is the way when Quizzify does it. I did not put in the names of the other vendors because I didn't ask their permission or anything like that. But you could, obviously, I don't need to ask my own permission. And by the way, this is not just a Quizzify thing. There are actually 3 health literacy vendors that ask Q&A. There's us. There's EdLogix. There's MedIncentive. And I'll tell you that if EdLogix, for instance, were asked the same question, they would also score high. I mean, they're a fine product. People like answering trivia questions about health, much more so than screening. So if Yale had done this, they would have learned right away that their program was failing. They could have reallocated their wellness dollars toward higher rated programs or programs guaranteeing savings. So here's what you should do. And I am about to turn the talking stick over to RD, and it looks like we actually will have time for a couple of questions. All of today's participants are going to receive the objective and the subjective tools, the indemnification language, the tools from the webinar itself, free. And RD, I think I turn it over to you at this point, right?
Great. Thank you, Al. Thank you for all that great information. If you could go to the next slide. As Al mentioned, everyone that signed up for this webinar will receive a recording of the webinar, and you'll receive all the things that Al mentioned absolutely free. Why do we do this? We're a mission-driven organization to try to help the buyers of healthcare through education and connections and the validation of vendors, help them buy better. We're very passionate about trying to improve healthcare, and that's why we do it. So you're going to receive an email shortly after this webinar, which will give you full access to this Certified Outcomes Report analysis. It's a half an hour to go through it. It's all online, and it's fabulous education, teaching you some of the techniques that Al talked about today that our own data scientists and health population experts use in validating performance claims of vendors. Wouldn't that be great to just have it as a quiver for yourself as you're making these decisions? Also, from a career perspective too, it's great to put these initials after your name, showing that you've gone through this education, and it's also recognized by SHRM for recertification credit. So really no downside to this. So look for that email. Again, there's no strings attached. We just want to get the information out there. We just can't validate the performance claims quick enough. There's probably been 20 new vendors that will be calling you just from this phone call that have probably gotten funded trying to sell a new program. So these are great tools to have for yourself for making decisions. And it's based off of sort of peer learning and experts that have spent a great time and effort into this. Next slide. The other thing you're going to see on the email, as Al mentioned, is you'll have access to this tool, the BEST, the Benefits Engagement Survey tool. We've just created it. It's absolutely free. You'll be able to put the benefits in. You'll be able to assign a PEPY to it. It will create a link for you. You can put that link into an email to your employees, and it will start collecting their opinion so that you can understand where those benefits rank on the chart. It'll create the chart for you, which might be very helpful to you in reporting and other things, but absolutely free, no downside, no strings attached. You're going to receive a link to that as well. And then, why do we do all this? Well, we are the national provider of the Certified Health Value Professional Program. It's a 15 to 20 hour online program, all recognized by SHRM, all counting towards SHRM recertification credit. And we believe sort of if you go through CORE, which is one of the modules of the CHVP, you'll potentially want more. It's a salty potato chip and you might want the whole bag. I realized today was about wellness. But that's why we do it. This is taking off across the country. After the SHRM recognition, we have been adopted by the Florida Alliance for Health Value, and it's now a member benefit for employers in Florida. The Pittsburgh Coalition as well has just taken us on, and others. Disney just signed up, as a matter of fact. So it's really catching on across the country, and this may be something you'd be interested in having as a tool for yourself as you're every year looking at health benefits, but also from a career angle. Next slide, please. So look for that email and definitely take advantage of these things.
So
and hopefully you'll hear. Go ahead.
I was going to say we have time for questions.
Yes, we do, Al. Yep, great. Let me just close out here. Thank you from the Validation Institute, and thank you, Al. Go ahead and you want to take a question here from the ones that came in online?
Yeah, I'll ask Karen or Stephanie.
Why don't we do one here? I'll take it. Al, one is, what's the cutoff point for the size of an incentive or a penalty not to be liable?
Yeah, I knew I was going to get that one, and I don't know the answer because nobody knows. It's not knowable. But what I will tell you is if you're in the low hundreds of dollars, you're absolutely fine. You can take it to the bank. If you're in the high hundreds of dollars, or certainly four figures, you're going to need a vendor to indemnify you because you're exposed. I just don't know where the cutoff point is.
Sure. We've got lots of questions. We're going to answer them all following the webinar, but here's another one. If we offer a better health benefit or a lower contribution for people who complete the screening, does that count as an incentive?
Yes. So it absolutely does.
Okay, great. And then time for a couple more here. Thanks for everybody for hanging on. Over about 700 people on the call today.
And most
our
of them
HRA,
stayed, I might add. Yeah.
Exactly, fantastic. Our HRA asked very personal questions like, at what age did you get your period? We no longer do screening, though. Are we still liable?
It's funny because I think someone is circulating this at what age do you get your period HRA? This is like the third time I've heard about it in the last few months. First of all, there's literally nothing to be gained from asking that question. And second, an HRA that asks personal health questions is equivalent to a screen as far as the Americans with Disabilities Act is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Another one, there was just an article in Modern Healthcare praising wellness programs. So isn't your conclusion open debate?
Well, I looked at that article in Modern Healthcare, and it was about Optum, but it turns out that Optum is a big advertiser in Modern Healthcare, so that's observation number one. And I'm not saying that Optum put pressure on them. I'm just making the observation that these two events happen to be true. But the other thing I would add is either deliberately or through just some unbelievable journalistic negligence, the author of this article quoted the 2010 study by Catherine Baker and Professor Song that showed that wellness saved money, but somehow managed not to quote the 2019 study that retracted the 2010 study and showed that wellness did not save money. Now, I don't know if this was deliberate or negligent, but one way or another, it gave a very misleading view of what Professors Baker and Song said.
I can squeeze one more in here. These are great questions. And that's one of the things, if you go through the online core course, which we really encourage you to do, it'll help you ask the right questions. Another question here, Al, we got time for one more. Does requiring annual checkups count as clinical intervention under ADA rules?
I was hoping nobody would ask that question because I don't know the answer. So I suspect that the answer to that is that you're perfectly okay requiring them. Now, whether you should or not as a clinical issue is a different one. But I suspect that most courts would draw the line somewhere else. That they're not going to say you can't. You can tell employees they can go to the doctor. You just can't be present at the exam or ask them what what the exact results were. You can ask if they had a physical or not.
Yep. Well, great. There's lots of questions in here. We will answer. We will study them all and we'll get back to them. Correct, Al? We'll be emailing this out.
Yeah. Maybe not not today because I think there are quite a number, but tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah, there are. Yeah. So I apologize, Lori, Jennifer, Diane. There's lots of questions in here, many more. We'll get those to you. Please look for our email. We really encourage you to go through Quora, take a look at the tool we're going to send you, and thank you for your time today. We will be presenting more webinars. We'd love your feedback on this webinar. Thank you so much for your time, and that concludes today's webinar.